But it occurs that the enemy of the human race pays no attention to our fine speeches, and in his uncivil and savage way flings himself upon the Prussians without giving them time to finish the parade that they had begun, and by a couple of conjuring tricks thrashes them completely, and goes to take up his quarters in the palace of Potsdam. "I most earnestly desire," writes the King of Prussia to Bonaparte, "that your Majesty may be received and treated in my palace in a manner agreeable to you, and I have hastened to take all the measures to that end which circumstances allow. May I have succeeded." The Prussian generals pride themselves on their politeness towards the French, and lay down their arms at the first summons. The head of the garrison at Glogau, who has 10,000 men, asks the King of Prussia what he is to do if he is summoned to surrender. All these are actual facts. In short, hoping only to produce an effect by our military attitude, we find ourselves at war in good earnest, and what is more, at war on our own frontiers with and for the King of Prussia. Everything is fully ready. We only want one little thing, that is, the commander-in-chief. As it is thought that the successes of Austerlitz might have been more decisive if the commander-in-chief had not been so young, the men of 80 have been passed in review, and of Prosorovsky and Kamensky the latter is preferred. The general comes to us in a kibik, after the fashion of Suvorov, and is greeted with acclamations of joy and triumph. On the 4th comes the first post from Petersburg. The mails are taken to the marshal's room, for he likes to do everything himself. I am called to sort the letters and take those meant for us. The marshal looks on while we do it, and waits for the packets addressed to him. We seek, there are none. The marshal gets impatient, sets to work himself, and finds letters from the Emperor for Count T, Prince V, and others. Then he throws himself into one of his furies. He rages against everybody, snatches hold of the letters, opens them, and reads those from the Emperor to other people. "Ah, so that's how I'm being treated. No confidence in me. Oh, ordered to keep an eye on me. Very well. Get along with you." And then he writes the famous order of the day to General Bennigsen. "I am wounded. I cannot ride on horseback, consequently cannot command the army. You have led your corps d'armée defeated to Pultusk. Here it remains exposed and destitute of wood and of forage, and in need of assistance, and so, as you reported yourself to Count Buxhaven yesterday, you must think of retreat to our frontier, and so do today. All my expeditions on horseback," he writes to the Emperor, "have given me a saddle sore, which, after my former journeys, quite prevents my sitting a horse, and commanding an army so widely scattered, and therefore I have handed over the said command to the general next in seniority to me, Count Buxhaven, having dispatched to him all my suite and appurtenances of the same, advising him, if bread should run short, to retreat further into the interior of Prussia, seeing that bread for 1 day's rations only is left, and some regiments have none, as the commanders Osterman and Sedmoretsky have reported, and the peasantry of the country have had everything eaten up. I shall myself remain in the hospital at Ostrolenka till I am cured. In regard to which I must humbly submit the report that if the army remains another fortnight in its present bivouac, by spring not a man will be left in health. Graciously discharged from his duty, an old man who is sufficiently disgraced by his inability to perform the great and glorious task for which he was chosen. I shall await here in the hospital your most gracious acceptance of my retirement, that I may not have to act the part of a secretary rather than a commander. My removal is not producing the slightest sensation. A blind man is leaving the army, that is all. More like me can be found in Russia by thousands. The marshal is angry with the emperor, and punishes all of us. Isn't it logical? That is the first act. In the next, the interest and the absurdity rise as they ought. After the marshal has departed, it appears that we are within sight of the enemy, and shall have to give battle. Buxhaven is commanding officer by right of seniority, but General Bennigsen is not of that opinion, though rather that it is he and his corps who face the enemy, and he wants to seize the opportunity to fight a battle on his own hand, as the Germans say. He fights it. It is the Battle of Pultusk, which is counted a great victory, but which, in my opinion, is nothing of the kind. We civilians, you know, have a very ugly way of deciding whether battles are lost or won. The side that retreats after the battle has lost, that is what we say, and according to that, we lost the Battle of Pultusk. In short, we retreat after the battle, but we send a message to Petersburg with news of a victory, and the general does not give up the command to Buxhaven, hoping to receive from Petersburg the title of Commander-in-Chief in return for his victory. During this interregnum, we begin an excessively interesting and original scheme of maneuvers. The aim does not, as it should, consist in avoiding or attacking the enemy, but solely in avoiding General Buxhaven, who by right of seniority should be our commanding officer. We pursue this object with so much energy that even when we cross a river which is not fordable, we burn the bridges in order to separate ourselves from our enemy, who, at the moment, is not Bonaparte, but Buxhaven. General Buxhaven was nearly attacked and taken by a superior force of the enemy, in consequence of one of our fine maneuvers which saved us from him. Buxhaven pursues us. We scuttle. No sooner does he cross to our side of the river than we cross back to the other. At last our enemy Buxhaven catches us and attacks us. The two generals quarrel. There is even a challenge on Buxhaven's part and an epileptic fit on Bennigsen's. But at the critical moment, the messenger who carried the news of our Pultusk victory brings us from Petersburg our appointment as commander-in-chief, and the first enemy, Buxhaven, being overthrown, we are able to think of the second, Bonaparte. But what should happen at that very moment but the rising against us of a third enemy, which is the Holy Armament, fiercely crying out for bread, meat, biscuits, hay, and I don't know what else. The storehouses are empty, the roads impassable. The Holy Armament sets itself to pillage, and that in a way of which the last campaign can give you no notion. Half the regiments have turned themselves into free companies, and are overrunning the country with fire and sword. The inhabitants are totally ruined. The hospitals are overflowing with sick, and famine is everywhere. Twice over the headquarters have been attacked by bands of marauders, and the commander-in-chief himself has had to ask for a battalion to drive them off. In one of these attacks, my empty trunk and my dressing-gown were carried off. The Emperor proposes to give authority to all the commanders of divisions to shoot marauders, but I greatly fear this will oblige one half of the army to shoot the other. Prince Andrei at first read only with his eyes, but unconsciously what he read, though he knew how much faith to put in Bilibin, began to interest him more and more. When he reached this passage, he crumpled up the letter and threw it away. It was not what he read that angered him. He was angry that the faraway life out there, in which he had no part, could trouble him. He closed his eyes, rubbed his forehead with his hand, as though to drive out all interest in what he had been reading, and listened to what was passing in the nursery. Suddenly he fancied a strange sound through the door. A panic seized him. He was afraid something might have happened to the baby while he was reading the letter. He went on tiptoe to the door of the nursery and opened it. At the instant that he went in, he saw that the nurse was hiding something from him with a scared face, and Princess Maria was no longer beside the crib. "My dear," he heard behind him Princess Maria whisper, in a tone of despair it seemed to him. As so often happens after prolonged sleeplessness and anxiety, he was seized by a groundless panic. The idea came into his mind that the baby was dead. All he saw and heard seemed a confirmation of his terror. All is over, he thought, and a cold sweat came out on his forehead. He went to the crib, beside himself, believing that he would find it empty, that the nurse had been hiding the dead baby. He opened the curtains, and for a long while his hurrying, frightened eyes could not find the baby. At last he saw him. The red-cheeked child lay stretched across the crib, with its head lower than the pillow, and it was making a smacking sound with its lips in its sleep, and breathing evenly. Prince Andrei rejoiced at seeing the child, as though he had already lost him. He bent down, and tried with his lips whether the baby was feverish, as his sister had shown him. The soft forehead was moist. He touched the head with his hand. Even the hair was wet. The child was in such a thorough perspiration. He was not dead. On the contrary, it was evident that the crisis was over and he was better. Prince Andrei longed to snatch up, to squeeze, to press to his heart that little helpless creature. He did not dare to do so. He stood over him, gazing at his head and his little arms and legs that showed beneath the quilt. He heard a rustle beside him, and a shadow seemed to come under the canopy of the crib. He did not look round, and still gazing at the baby's face, listened to his regular breathing. The dark shadow was Princess Marya, who with noiseless steps had approached the crib, lifted the canopy, and let it fall again behind her. Prince Andrei knew it was she without looking round, and held out his hand to her. She squeezed his hand. "He is in a perspiration," said Prince Andrei. "I was coming to tell you so." The baby faintly stirred in its sleep, smiled, and rubbed its forehead against the pillow. Prince Andrei looked at his sister. In the even half-light under the hanging of the crib, Princess Marya's luminous eyes shone more than usual with the happy tears that stood in them. She bent forward to her brother and kissed him, her head catching in the canopy of the crib. They shook their fingers at one another, and still stood in the twilight of the canopy, as though unwilling to leave that seclusion where they three were alone, shut off from all the world. Prince Andrei, ruffling his hair against the muslin hangings, was the first to move away. "Yes, that is the one thing left me now," he said with a sigh. Chapter 10. Shortly after his reception into the Brotherhood of the Freemasons, Pierre set off to the Kiev province, where were the greater number of his peasants, with full instructions written for his guidance in doing his duty on his estates. On reaching Kiev, Pierre sent for all his stewards to his head counting-house, and explained to them his intentions and his desires. He told them that steps would be very shortly taken for the complete liberation of his peasants from serfdom, that till that time his peasants were not to be overburdened with labor, that the women with children were not to be sent out to work, that assistance was to be given to the peasants, that wrongdoing was to be met with admonishment and not with corporal punishment, and that on every estate there must be founded hospitals, almshouses, and schools. Several of the stewards, among them were some bailiffs barely able to read and write, listened with dismay, supposing the upshot of the young count's remarks to be that he was dissatisfied with their management and embezzlement of his money. Others, after the first shock of alarm, derived amusement from Pierre's lisp and the new words he used that they had not heard before. Others again found a simple satisfaction in hearing the sound of their master's voice. But some, among them the head steward, divined from this speech how to deal with their master for the attainment of their own ends. The head steward expressed great sympathy with Pierre's projects, but observed that, apart from these innovations, matters were in a bad way and needed thoroughly going into. In spite of Count Betsuhov's enormous wealth, Pierre, ever since he had inherited it, and had been, as people said, in receipt of an annual income of 500,000, had felt much less rich than when he had been receiving an allowance of 10,000 from his father. In general outlines, he was vaguely aware of the following budget. About 80,000 was being paid into the land bank as interest on mortgages on his estates. About 30,000 went to the maintenance of his estate in the suburbs of Moscow, his Moscow house, and his cousins the princesses. About 15,000 were given in pensions, and as much more to benevolent institutions. 150,000 were sent to his countess for her maintenance. Some 70,000 were paid away as interest on debts. The building of a new church had for the last 2 years been costing about 10,000. The remainder, some 100,000, was spent, he hardly knew how, and almost every year he was forced to borrow. Moreover, every year the head steward wrote to him of conflagrations, or failures of crops, or of the necessity of rebuilding factories or workshops. And so the first duty with which Pierre was confronted was the one for which he had the least capacity and inclination, attention to practical business. Every day Pierre went into things with the head steward, but he felt that what he was doing did not advance matters 1 inch. He felt that all he did was quite apart from the reality, that his efforts had no grip on the business, and would not set it in progress. On one side, the head steward put matters in their worst light, proving to Pierre the necessity of paying his debts, and entering upon new undertakings with the labor of his serf peasants, to which Pierre would not agree. On the other side, Pierre urged their entering upon the work of liberation, to which the head steward objected the necessity of first paying off the loans from the land bank, and the consequent impossibility of haste in the matter. The head steward did not say that this was utterly impossible. He proposed as the means for attaining this object the sale of the forests in the Kostroma province, the sale of the lands on the lower Volga, and of the Crimean estate. But all these operations were connected in the head steward's talk with such a complexity of processes, the removal of certain prohibitory clauses, the obtaining of certain permissions, and so on, that Pierre lost the thread, and could only say, "Yes, yes, do so then." Pierre had none of that practical tenacity which would have made it possible for him to undertake the business himself, and so he did not like it, and only tried to keep up a pretense of going into business before the head steward. The steward, too, kept up a pretense before the Count of regarding his participation in it as of great use to his master, and a great inconvenience to himself. In Kiev he had acquaintances. Persons not acquaintances made haste to become so, and gave a warm welcome to the young man of fortune, the largest landowner of the province, who had come into their midst. The temptations on the side of Pierre's besetting weakness, the one to which he had given the first place at his initiation into the lodge, were so strong that he could not resist them. Again, whole days, weeks, and months of his life were busily filled up with parties, dinners, breakfasts, and balls, giving him as little time to think as at Petersburg. Instead of the new life Pierre had hoped to lead, he was living just the same old life, only in different surroundings. Of the 3 precepts of Freemasonry, Pierre had to admit that he had not fulfilled that one which prescribes for every Mason the duty of being a model of moral life, and of the 7 virtues he was entirely without 2, morality and love of death. He comforted himself by reflecting that, on the other hand, he was filling the other precept, the improvement of the human race, and had other virtues, love for his neighbor and liberality. In the spring of 1807, Pierre made up his mind to go back again to Petersburg. On the way back, he intended to make the tour of all his estates, and to ascertain personally what had been done of what had been prescribed by him, and in what position the people now were who had been entrusted to him by God, and whom he had been striving to benefit. The head steward, who regarded all the young Count's freaks as almost insanity, disastrous to him, to himself, and to his peasants, made concessions to his weaknesses. While continuing to represent the liberation of his serfs as impracticable, he made arrangements on all his estates for the building of schools, hospitals, and asylums on a large scale, to be begun ready for the master's visit, prepared everywhere for him to be met, not with ceremonious processions, which he knew would not be to Pierre's taste, but with just the devotionally grateful welcomes, with holy images and bread and salt, such as would, according to his understanding of the Count, impress him and delude him. The southern spring, the easy, rapid journey in his Vienna carriage, and the solitude of the road, had a gladdening influence on Pierre. The estates, which he had not before visited, were one more picturesque than the other. The peasantry seemed everywhere thriving and touchingly grateful for the benefits conferred on them. Everywhere he was met by welcomes, which, though they embarrassed Pierre, yet at the bottom of his heart rejoiced him. At one place, the peasants had brought him bread and salt and the images of Peter and Paul, and begged permission in honor of his patron saints, Peter and Paul, and in token of love and gratitude for the benefits conferred on them, to erect at their own expense a new chapel in the church. At another place, he was welcomed by women with babies in their arms, who came to thank him for being released from the obligation of heavy labor. In a third place, he was met by a priest with a cross, surrounded by children, whom, by the favor of the Count, he was instructing in reading and writing and religion. On all his estates, Pierre saw with his own eyes stone buildings erected, or in the course of erection, all on one plan, hospitals, schools, and almshouses, which were in short time to be opened. Everywhere Pierre saw the steward's reckoning of service due to him diminished in comparison with the past, and heard touching thanks for what was remitted from deputations of peasants in blue, full-skirted coats. But Pierre did not know that where they brought him bread and salt, and were building a chapel of Peter and Paul, there was a trading village, and a fair on St. Peter's Day, that the chapel had been built long ago by wealthy peasants of the village, and that 9/10 of the peasants of that village were in the utmost destitution. He did not know that since by his orders nursing mothers were not sent to work on their master's land, those same mothers did even harder work on their own bit of land. He did not know that the priest who met him with the cross oppressed the peasants with his exactions, and that the pupils gathered around him were yielded up to him with tears, and redeemed for large sums by their parents. He did not know that the stone buildings were being raised by his laborers, and increased the forced labor of his peasants, which was only less upon paper. He did not know that where the steward pointed out to him in the account book the reduction of rent to 1/3 in accordance with his will, the labor exacted had been raised by 1/2. And so Pierre was enchanted by his journey over his estates, and came back completely to the philanthropic frame of mind in which he had left Petersburg, and wrote enthusiastic letters to his preceptor and brother, as he called the Grand Master. How easy it is, how little effort is needed to do so much good, thought Pierre, and how little we trouble ourselves to do it. He was happy at the gratitude shown him, but abashed at receiving it. That gratitude reminded him how much more he could do for those simple, good-hearted people. The head steward, a very stupid and crafty man, who thoroughly understood the clever and naive Count, and played with him like a toy, seeing the effect produced on Pierre by these carefully arranged receptions, was bolder in advancing arguments to prove the impossibility, and even more, the uselessness of liberating the peasants, who were so perfectly happy without that. In the recesses of his own heart, Pierre agreed with the steward that it was difficult to imagine people happier, and that there was no knowing what their future would be in freedom. But though reluctantly, he stuck to what he thought the right thing. The steward promised to use every effort to carry out the Count's wishes, perceiving clearly that the Count would never be in a position to verify whether every measure had been taken for the sale of the forests and estates for the repayment of loans from the bank, would never probably even inquire, and would certainly never find out that the buildings, when finished, stood empty, and that the peasants were giving in labor and money just what they gave with other masters, that is, all that could be got out of them. Chapter 11. Returning from his southern tour in the happiest frame of mind, Pierre carried out an intention he had long had, of visiting his friend Bolkonsky, whom he had not seen for 2 years. Bogucharovo lay in a flat, ugly part of the country, covered with fields and copses of fir and birch trees, in parts cut down. The manor house was at the end of the straight village that ran along each side of the high road, behind an overflowing pond newly dug, and still bare of grass on its banks in the midst of a young copse, with several large pines standing among the smaller trees. The homestead consisted of a threshing floor, serfs' quarters, stables, bath-houses, lodges, and a large stone house with a semicircular facade, still in course of erection. Round the house a garden had been newly laid out. The fences and gates were solid and new. Under a shed stood 2 fire engines and a tub painted green. The paths were straight, the bridges were strong and furnished with stone parapets. Everything had an air of being cared for and looked after. The house serfs on the way, in reply to inquiries where the prince was living, pointed to a small new lodge at the very edge of the pond. Prince Andrei's old body-servant, Anton, after assisting Pierre out of his carriage, said that the prince was at home, and conducted him into a clean little lobby. Pierre was struck by the modesty of this little clean house, after the splendid surroundings in which he had last seen his friend in Petersburg. He went hurriedly into the little parlor, still unplastered and smelling of pine wood, and would have gone further, but Anton ran ahead on tiptoe and knocked at the door. "What is it?" He heard a harsh, unpleasant voice. "A visitor," answered Anton. "Ask him to wait." And there was the sound of a chair being pushed back. Pierre went with rapid steps to the door, and came face to face with Prince Andrei, who came out frowning and looking older. Pierre embraced him, and, taking off his spectacles, kissed him and looked close at him. "Well, I didn't expect you. I am glad," said Prince Andrei. Pierre said nothing. He was looking in wonder at his friend, and could not take his eyes off him. He was struck by the change in Prince Andrei. His words were warm, there was a smile on the lips and the face, but there was a lusterless, dead look in his eyes, into which, in spite of his evident desire to seem glad, Prince Andrei could not throw a gleam of happiness. It was not only that his friend was thinner, paler, more manly-looking, but the look in his eyes and the line on his brow, that expressed prolonged concentration on some one subject, struck Pierre, and repelled him till he got used to it. On meeting, after a long separation, the conversation, as is always the case, did not for a long while rest on one subject. They asked questions, and gave brief replies about things of which they knew themselves they must talk at length. At last, the conversation began gradually to revolve more slowly about the questions previously touched only in passing: their life in the past, their plans for the future, Pierre's journeys, and what he had been doing, the war, and so on. The concentrated and crushed look which Pierre had noticed in Prince Andrei's eyes was still more striking now in the smile with which he listened to him, especially when he was telling him with earnestness and delight of his past or his future. It was as though Prince Andrei would have liked to take interest in what he was telling him, but could not. Pierre began to feel that to express enthusiasm, ideals, and hopes of happiness and goodness was unseemly before Prince Andrei. He felt ashamed of giving expression to all the new ideas he had gained from the Masons, which had been revived and strengthened in him by his last tour. He restrained himself, afraid of seeming naive. At the same time, he felt an irresistible desire to show his friend at once that he was now a quite different Pierre, better than the one he had known in Petersburg. "I can't tell you how much I have passed through during this time. I shouldn't know my old self." "Yes, you are very, very much changed since those days," said Prince Andrei. "Well, and what of you?" asked Pierre. "What are your plans?" "Plans?" repeated Prince Andrei ironically. "My plans," he repeated, as though wondering what was the meaning of such a word. "Why, you see I am building. I want next year to settle in here altogether." Pierre looked silently and intently into the face of Prince Andrei, which had grown so much older. "No, I'm asking about—" Pierre began, but Prince Andrei interrupted him. "But why talk about me? Talk to me, and tell me about your journey, about everything you have been doing on your estates." Pierre began describing what he had been doing on his estates, trying as far as he could to disguise his share in the improvements made on them. Prince Andrei several times put in a few words before Pierre could utter them, as though all Pierre's doings were an old, familiar story, and he were hearing it not only without interest, but even as it were a little ashamed of what was told him. Pierre began to feel awkward and positively wretched in his friend's company. He relapsed into silence. "I tell you what, my dear fellow," said Prince Andrei, who was unmistakably dreary and ill at ease with his visitor. "I'm simply bivouacking here. I only came over to have a look at things. I'm going back again to my sister today. I will introduce you to her. But I think you know her, though," he added, obviously trying to provide entertainment for his guest, with whom he now found nothing in common. "We will set off after dinner. And now, would you care to see my place?" They went out and walked about till dinner-time, talking of political news and common acquaintances, like people not very intimate. The only thing of which Prince Andrei now spoke with some eagerness and interest was the new buildings and homestead he was building. But even in the middle of the conversation on this subject, on the scaffolding, when Prince Andrei was describing to Pierre the plan of the house, he suddenly stopped. "There's nothing interesting in that, though. Let us go in to dinner and set off." At dinner, the conversation fell on Pierre's marriage. "I was very much surprised when I heard of it," said Prince Andrei. Pierre blushed, as he always did at any reference to his marriage, and said hurriedly, "I'll tell you one day how it all happened, but you know that it's all over and forever." "Forever?" said Prince Andrei. "Nothing's forever." "But do you know how it all ended? Did you hear of the duel?" "Yes, you had to go through that, too." "The one thing for which I thank God is that I didn't kill that man," said Pierre. "Why so?" said Prince Andrei. "To kill a vicious dog is a very good thing to do, really." "No, to kill a man is bad, wrong." "Why is it wrong?" repeated Prince Andrei. "What's right and wrong is a question it has not been given to men to decide. Men are forever in error, and always will be in error, and in nothing more than in what they regard as right and wrong." "What does harm to another man is wrong," said Pierre, feeling with pleasure that for the first time since his arrival, Prince Andrei was roused, and was beginning to speak, and eager to give expression to what had made him what he now was. "And who has told you what is harm to another man?" he asked. "Harm? Harm?" said Pierre. "We all know what harms ourselves." "Yes, we know that. But it's not the same harm we know about for ourselves that we do to another man," said Prince Andrei, growing more and more eager, and evidently anxious to express to Pierre his new view of things. He spoke in French. "I only know two very real ills in life, remorse and sickness. There is no good except the absence of those ills. To live for myself so as to avoid these two evils, that's the sum of my wisdom now." "And love for your neighbor and self-sacrifice?" began Pierre. "No, I can't agree with you. To live with the sole object of avoiding doing evil, so as not to be remorseful, that's very little. I used to live so. I used to live for myself, and I spoilt my life. And only now, when I'm living, at least trying to live," modesty impelled Pierre to correct himself, "for others, only now I have learnt to know all the happiness of life. No, I don't agree with you, and indeed, you don't believe what you're saying yourself." Prince Andrei looked at Pierre without speaking, and smiled ironically. "Well, you'll see my sister Marie. You will get on with her," said he. "Perhaps you are right for yourself," he added after a brief pause, "but everyone lives in his own way. You used to live for yourself, and you say that by doing so you almost spoiled your life, and have only known happiness since you began to live for others. And my experience has been the reverse. I used to live for glory. And what is glory? The same love for others, the desire to do something for them, the desire of their praise. In that way I lived for others, and not almost, but quite spoiled my life. And I have become more peaceful since I live only for myself." "But how are you living only for yourself?" Pierre asked, getting hot. "What of your son, your sister, your father?" "Yes, but that's all the same as myself. They are not others," said Prince Andrei. "But others, one's neighbors, as you and Marie call them, they are the great source of error and evil. One's neighbors are those, your Kiev peasants, whom one wants to do good to." And he looked at Pierre with a glance of ironical challenge. He unmistakably meant to draw him on. "You are joking," said Pierre, getting more and more earnest. "What error and evil can there be in my wishing? I have done very little, and done it very badly, but still wishing to do good, and doing indeed something anyway. What can be the harm if unhappy people, our peasants, people just like ourselves, growing up and dying with no other idea of God and the truth, but a senseless prayer and ceremony, if they are instructed in the consoling doctrines of a future life, of retribution and recompense and consolation? What harm and error can there be in my giving them doctors and a hospital and a refuge for the aged, when men are dying of disease without help, and it is so easy to give them material aid? And isn't there palpable, incontestable good, when the peasants and the women with young children have no rest day or night, and I give them leisure and rest?" said Pierre, talking hurriedly and lisping. "And I have done that. Badly, it's true, and too little of it, but I have done something towards it, and you'll not only fail to shake my conviction that I have done well, you'll not even shake my conviction that you don't believe that yourself. And the great thing," Pierre continued, "is that I know this, and know it for a certainty, that the enjoyment of doing this good is the only real happiness in life." "Oh, if you put the question like that, it's a different matter," said Prince Andrei. "I'm building a house and laying out a garden, while you are building hospitals. Either occupation may serve to pass the time. But as to what's right and what's good, leave that to one who knows all to judge. It's not for us to decide. Well, you want an argument," he added. "All right, let us have one." They got up from the table and sat out on the steps in default of a balcony. "Come, let us argue the matter," said Prince Andrei. "You talk of schools," he went on, crooking one finger, "instruction and so forth. That is, you want to draw him," he pointed to a peasant who passed by them, taking off his cap, "out of his animal condition, and to give him spiritual needs. But it seems to me that the only possible happiness is animal happiness, and you want to deprive him of it. I envy him, while you are trying to make him into me, without giving him my circumstances. Another thing you speak of is lightening his toil. But, to my notions, physical labor is as much a necessity for him, as much a condition of his existence, as intellectual work is for me and for you. You can't help thinking. I go to bed at 3 o'clock. Thoughts come into my mind, and I can't go to sleep. I turn over, and can't sleep till morning, because I'm thinking, and I can't help thinking, just as he can't help plowing and mowing. If he didn't, he would go to the tavern or become ill. Just as I could not stand his terrible physical labor, but should die of it in a week, so he could not stand my physical inactivity. He would grow fat and die. The third thing—" "What was it you talked about?" Prince Andrei crooked his third finger. "Oh, yes. Hospitals. Medicine. He has a fit and dies, but you have him bled and cure him. He will drag about an invalid for 10 years, a burden to everyone. It would be ever so much simpler and more comfortable for him to die. Others are born, and there are always plenty. If you grudge losing a laborer, that's how I look at him, but you want to cure him from love for him. But he has no need of that. And besides, what a notion that medicine has ever cured anyone. Killed them, yes," he said, scowling and turning away from Pierre. Prince Andrei gave such clear and precise utterance to his ideas that it was evident he had thought more than once of this already, and he talked rapidly and eagerly, as a man does who has long been silent. His eyes grew keener, the more pessimistic were the views he expressed. "Oh, this is awful, awful," said Pierre. "I don't understand how one can live with such ideas. I have had moments of thinking like that. It was not long ago at Moscow, and on a journey. But then I become so abject that I don't live at all. Everything's hateful to me, myself most of all. Then I don't eat, I don't wash. How can you go on?" "Why not wash? That's not clean," said Prince Andrei. "On the contrary, one has to try and make one's life more agreeable as far as one can. I'm alive, and it's not my fault that I am, and so I have to try without hurting others to get on as well as I can, till death." "But what impulse have you to live with such ideas? You would sit still without stirring, taking no part in anything." "Life won't leave you in peace, even so. I should be glad to do nothing. But here you see on one side, the local nobility have done me the honor of electing me a marshal. It was all I could do to get out of it. They could not understand that I haven't what's needed, haven't that good-natured, fussy vulgarity we all know so well, that's needed for it. Then there's this house here, which had to be built, that I might have a nook of my own where I could be quiet. Now there's the militia." "Why aren't you serving in the army?" "Why aren't you serving in the army?" "After Austerlitz?" said Prince Andrei gloomily. "No, thank you. I swore to myself that I would never serve in the Russian army again. And I will not. If Bonaparte were stationed here at Smolensk, threatening bleak hills, even then I wouldn't serve in the Russian army. Well, so I was saying," Prince Andrei went on, regaining his composure, "now there's the militia, my father's commander-in-chief of the Third Circuit, and the only means for me to escape from active service is to serve under him." "So you are in the service, then?" "Yes." He was silent for a while. "Then why do you serve?" "I'll tell you why. My father is one of the most remarkable men of his time, but he's grown old. And he's not cruel exactly, but he's of too energetic a character. He's terrible from his habit of unlimited power, and now with this authority given him by the Emperor as a commander-in-chief in the militia. If I had been 2 hours later a fortnight ago, he would have hanged the register clerk at Yunovo," said Prince Andrei with a smile. "So I serve under him now, because no one except me has any influence over my father, and I sometimes save him from an act which would be a source of misery to him afterwards." "Ah, there, you see." "Yes, it is not as you think," Prince Andrei continued. "I didn't, and I don't wish well in the slightest to that scoundrelly register clerk who had stolen boots or something from the militiamen. Indeed, I would have been very glad to see him hanged, but I feel for my father, that is, again, myself." Prince Andrei grew more and more eager. His eyes glittered feverishly as he tried to prove to Pierre that there was never the slightest desire to do good to his neighbor in his actions. "Well, you want to liberate your serfs too," he pursued. "That's a very good thing, but not for you. I expect you have never flogged a man, nor sent one to Siberia, and still less for your peasants. If a peasant is beaten, flogged, sent to Siberia, I dare say he's not a bit the worse for it. In Siberia he can lead the same brute existence. The stripes on the body heal, and he's as happy as before. But it's needed for the people who are ruined morally, who are devoured by remorse, who stifle that remorse and grow callous from being able to inflict punishment all round them. Perhaps you have not seen it, but I have seen good men, brought up in the traditions of unlimited power with years, as they grew more irritable, become cruel and brutal, conscious of it, and unable to control themselves, and growing more and more miserable." Prince Andrei spoke with such earnestness that Pierre could not help thinking those ideas were suggested to him by his father. He made him no reply. "So that's what I grieve for human dignity, for peace of conscience, for purity, and not for their backs or their heads, which always remain just the same backs and heads, however you thrash or shave them. No, no, 1,000 times no, I shall never agree with you," said Pierre. Chapter 12. In the evening, Prince Andrei and Pierre got into the coach and drove to Bleak Hills. Prince Andrei watched Pierre, and broke the silence from time to time with speeches that showed he was in a good humor. Pointing to the fields, he told him of the improvements he was making in the management of his land. Pierre preserved a gloomy silence, replying only by monosyllables, and apparently plunged in his own thoughts. Pierre was reflecting that Prince Andrei was unhappy, that he was in error, that he did not know the true light, and that he ought to come to his aid, to enlighten him and lift him up. But as soon as he began to deliberate on what he would say, he foresaw that Prince Andrei, with one word, one argument, would annihilate everything in his doctrine, and he was afraid to begin, afraid of exposing his most cherished and holiest to possible ridicule. "No, what makes you think so?" Pierre began all at once, lowering his head and looking like a butting bull. "What makes you think so? You ought not to think so." "Think so about what?" asked Prince Andrei in surprise. "About life, about the destination of man. It can't be so. I used to think like that, and I have been saved. Do you know by what? Freemasonry. No, you must not smile. Freemasonry is not a religious sect, nor mere ceremonial rites, as I used to suppose. Freemasonry is the best, the only expression of the highest, eternal aspects of humanity." And he began expounding to Prince Andrei Freemasonry as he understood it. He said that Freemasonry is the teaching of Christianity, freed from its political and religious fetters, the teaching of equality, fraternity, and love. "Our holy brotherhood is the only thing that has real meaning in life. All the rest is a dream," said Pierre. "You understand, my dear fellow, that outside this brotherhood all is filled with lying and falsehood, and I agree with you that there's nothing left for an intelligent and good-hearted man but, like you, to get through his life, only trying not to hurt others. But make our fundamental convictions your own. Enter into our brotherhood. Give yourself up to us. Let us guide you. And you will at once feel yourself, as I felt, a part of a vast, unseen chain, the origin of which is lost in the skies," said Pierre, looking straight before him. Prince Andrei listened to Pierre's words in silence. Several times he did not catch words from the noise of the wheels, and he asked Pierre to repeat what he had missed. From the peculiar light that glowed in Prince Andrei's eyes, and from his silence, Pierre saw that his words were not in vain, that Prince Andrei would not interrupt him nor laugh at what he said. They reached a river that had overflowed its banks, and had to cross it by a ferry. While the coach and horses waited, they crossed on the ferry. Prince Andrei, with his elbow on the rail, gazed mutely over the stretch of water shining in the setting sun. "Well, what do you think about it?" asked Pierre. "Why are you silent?" "What do I think? I have heard what you say. That's all right," said Prince Andrei. "But you say, 'Enter into our brotherhood, and we will show you the object of life, and the destination of man, and the laws that govern the universe.' But who are we? Men. How do you know it all? Why is it I alone don't see what you see? You see on earth the dominion of good and truth, but I don't see it." Pierre interrupted him. "Do you believe in a future life?" he asked. "In a future life?" repeated Prince Andrei. But Pierre did not give him time to answer, and took this repetition as a negative reply, the more readily as he knew Prince Andrei's atheistic views in the past. "You say that you can't see the dominion of good and truth on the earth. I have not seen it either, and it cannot be seen if one looks upon our life as the end of everything. On earth, this earth here," Pierre pointed to the open country, "there is no truth. All is deception and wickedness. But in the world, the whole world, there is a dominion of truth, and we are now the children of earth, but eternally the children of the whole universe. Don't I feel in my soul that I am a part of that vast, harmonious whole? Don't I feel that in that vast, innumerable multitude of beings, in which is made manifest the Godhead, the higher power, what you choose to call it, I constitute one grain, one step upward from lower beings to higher ones? If I see clearly that ladder that rises up from the vegetable to man, why should I suppose that ladder breaks off with me, and does not go on further and further? I feel that I cannot disappear as nothing does disappear in the universe, that indeed I always shall be and always have been. I feel that beside me, above me, there are spirits, and that in their world there is truth." "Yes, that's Herder's theory," said Prince Andrei. "But it's not that, my dear boy, convinces me, but life and death are what have convinced me. What convinces me is seeing a creature dear to me, and bound up with me, to whom one has done wrong, and hoped to make it right." Prince Andrei's voice shook, and he turned away. "And all at once that creature suffers, is in agony, and ceases to be. What for?
It cannot be that there is no answer. And I believe there is. That's what convinces. That's what has convinced me," said Prince Andrei.
Just so, said Pierre. "Isn't that the very thing I'm saying?"
"No. I only say that one is convinced of the necessity of a future life, not by argument, but when one goes hand in hand with someone, and all at once that someone slips away yonder into nowhere, and you are left facing that abyss and looking down into it. And I have looked into it."
"Well, that's it then. You know there is a yonder, and there is someone. Yonder is the future life. Someone is God."
Prince Andrei did not answer. The coach and horses had long been taken across to the other bank, and had been put back into the shafts, and the sun had half sunk below the horizon, and the frost of evening was starring the pools at the fording place. But Pierre and Andrei, to the astonishment of the footman, coachman, and ferryman, still stood in the ferry and were still talking.
If there is God, and there is a future life, then there is truth and there is goodness, and the highest happiness of man consists in striving for their attainment. We must live, we must love, we must believe, said Pierre, that we are not only living today on this clod of earth, but have lived and will live forever there in everything. He pointed to the sky. Prince Andrei stood with his elbow on the rail of the ferry, and as he listened to Pierre, he kept his eyes fixed on the red reflection of the sun on the bluish stretch of water. Pierre ceased speaking. There was perfect stillness. The ferry had long since come to a standstill, and only the eddies of the current flapped with a faint sound on the bottom of the ferry-boat. It seemed to Prince Andrei that the lapping of the water kept up a refrain to Pierre's words. "It's the truth. Believe it." Prince Andrei sighed, and with a radiant, childlike, tender look in his eyes, glanced at the face of Pierre, flushed and triumphant, though still timidly conscious of his friend's superiority. "Yes, if it only were so," he said. "Let us go and get in, though," added Prince Andrei, and as he got out of the ferry, he looked up at the sky, to which Pierre had pointed him, and for the first time since Austerlitz, he saw the lofty eternal sky, as he had seen it lying on the field of Austerlitz, and something that had long been slumbering, something better that had been in him, suddenly awoke with a joyful, youthful feeling in his soul. That feeling vanished as soon as Prince Andrei returned again to the habitual conditions of life, but he knew that that feeling, though he knew not how to develop it, was still within him. Pierre's visit was for Prince Andrei an epoch, from which there began, though outwardly unchanged, a new life in his inner world. Chapter 13. It was dark by the time Prince Andrei and Pierre drove up to the principal entrance of the house at Bleak Hills. While they were driving in, Prince Andrei, with a smile, drew Pierre's attention to a commotion that was taking place at the back entrance. A bent little old woman with a wallet on her back, and a short man with long hair, in a black garment, ran back to the gate on seeing the carriage driving up. 2 women ran out after them, and all the 4, looking round at the carriage with scared faces, ran in at the back entrance. "Those are Masha's God's folk," said Prince Andrei. "They took us for my father. It's the one matter in which she does not obey him. He orders them to drive away these pilgrims, but she receives them." "But what are God's folk?" asked Pierre. Prince Andrei had not time to answer him. The servants came out to meet them, and he inquired where the old prince was and whether they expected him home soon. The old prince was still in the town, and they were expecting him every minute. Prince Andrei led Pierre away to his own suite of rooms, which were always in perfect readiness for him in his father's house, and went off himself to the nursery. "Let us go to my sister," said Prince Andrei, coming back to Pierre.
I have not seen her yet. She is in hiding now, sitting with her God's folk. Serves her right. She will be put to shame, and you will see God's folk. It's curious, upon my word." "What are God's folk?" asked Pierre. "You shall see." Princess Maria certainly was disconcerted, and reddened in patches when they went in. In her snug room, with lamps before the holy picture stand, there was sitting, behind the samovar, on the sofa beside her, a young lad with a long nose and long hair, wearing a monk's cassock. In a low chair near sat a wrinkled, thin old woman, with a meek expression on her childlike face. "Andre, why did you not let me know?" she said with mild reproach, standing before her pilgrims like a hen before her chickens. "Delighted to see you. I am very glad to see you," she said to Pierre, as he kissed her hand. She had known him as a child, and now his friendship with Andre, his unhappy marriage, and above all, his kindly, simple face, disposed her favorably to him. She looked at him with her beautiful, luminous eyes, and seemed to say to him, "I like you very much, but please, don't laugh at my friends." After the first phrases of greeting, they sat down. "Oh, and Ivanushka's here," said Prince Andrei with a smile, indicating the young pilgrim. "Andrusha," said Princess Maria imploringly. "You must know, it is a woman," said Andrei to Pierre in French. "Andrei, for heaven's sake," repeated Princess Maria. It was plain that Prince Andrei's ironical tone to the pilgrims, and Princess Maria's helpless championship of them, were their habitual, long-established attitudes on the subject. "Why, my dear girl," said Prince Andrei, "you ought to be obliged to me, on the contrary, for explaining your intimacy with this young man to Pierre." "Indeed?" said Pierre, looking with curiosity and seriousness, for which Princess Maria felt particularly grateful to him, at the face of Ivanushka, who, seeing that he was the subject under discussion, looked at all of them with his crafty eyes. Princess Maria had not the slightest need to feel embarrassment on her friend's account. They were quite at their ease. The old woman cast down her eyes, but stole sidelong glances at the newcomers, and turning her cup upside down in the saucer, and laying a nibbled lump of sugar beside it, sat calmly without stirring in her chair, waiting to be offered another cup. Ivanushka, sipping out of the saucer, peered from under his brows with his sly, feminine eyes at the young men. "Where have you been? In Kiev?" Prince Andrei asked the old woman. "I have, good sir," answered the old woman, who was conversationally disposed. "Just at the holy birth I was deemed worthy to be a partaker in holy, heavenly mysteries from the saints. And now, good sir, from Kolyazin a great blessing has been revealed." "And Ivanushka was with you?" "I go alone by myself, benefactor," said Ivanushka, trying to speak in a bass voice. "It was only at Yonovo I joined Pelageushka." Pelageushka interrupted her companion. She was evidently anxious to tell of what she had seen. "In Kolyazin, good sir, great is the blessing revealed." "What, new relics?" asked Prince Andrei. "Hush, Andrei," said Princess Maria. "Don't tell us about it, Pelageushka." "Not? Nay, ma'am, why not tell him? I like him. He's a good gentleman, chosen of God. He's my benefactor. He gave me 10 rubles, I remember. When I was in Kiev, Kiryusha, the crazy pilgrim, tells me, verily a man of God, winter and summer he goes barefoot. 'Why are you not going to your right place?' says he. 'Go to Kolyazin. There's a wonder-working icon. A holy Mother of God has been revealed.' On these words I said good-bye to the holy folk, and off I went." All were silent. Only the pilgrim woman talked on in her measured voice, drawing her breath regularly. "I came, good sir, and folks say to me, 'A great blessing has been vouchsafed. Drops of myrrh trickle from the cheeks of the Holy Mother of God.'" "Come, that will do, that will do. "You shall tell me later," said Princess Marya, flushing. "Let me ask her a question," said Pierre. "Did you see it yourself?" he asked. "To be sure, good sir, I myself was found worthy. Such a brightness overspread the face, like the light of heaven, and from the Holy Mother's cheeks drops like this, and like this." "Why, but it must be a trick," said Pierre naively, after listening attentively to the old woman. "Oh, sir, what a thing to say!" said Pelagiushka with horror, turning to Princess Marya for support. "They impose upon the people," he repeated. "Lord Jesus Christ!" said the pilgrim woman, crossing herself. "Oh, don't speak so, sir. There was a general did not believe like that, said, 'The monks cheat,' and as he said it, he was struck blind. And he dreamed a dream. The Holy Mother of Pechersky comes to him and says, 'Believe in me, and I will heal thee.' And so he kept beseeching them, 'Take me to her, take me to her.' It's the holy truth I'm telling you, I've seen it myself. They carried him, blind as he was, to her. He went up, fell down, and said, 'Heal me. I will give thee,' says he, 'what the Tsar bestowed on me.' I saw it myself, a sort of star carved in it. Well, he regained his sight. It's a sin to speak so. God will punish you," she said admonishingly to Pierre. "How? Was the star in the holy image?" asked Pierre. "And didn't they make the Holy Mother a general?" said Prince Andrei, smiling. Pelagiushka turned suddenly pale and flung up her hands. "Sir, it's a sin of you. You've a son," she said, suddenly turning from white to dark red. "Sir, for what you have said, God forgive you." She crossed herself. "Lord, forgive them. Lady, what's this?" She turned to Princess Marya. She got up, and, almost crying, began gathering up her wallet. Plainly, she was both frightened and ashamed at having accepted bounty in a house where they could say such things, and sorry that she must henceforth deprive herself of the bounty of that house. "What did you want to do this for?" said Princess Marya. "Why did you come to me?" "No, I was joking, really, Pelagiushka," said Pierre. "Princesse, ma parole, je n'ai pas voulu l'offenser. I said it meaning nothing. Don't think of it, I was joking," he said, smiling timidly and trying to smooth over his crime. "It was all my fault, but he didn't mean it, he was joking." Pelagiushka remained mistrustful, but Pierre's face wore a look of such genuine penitence, and Prince Andrei looked so mildly from Pelagiushka to Pierre, that she was gradually reassured. Chapter 14. The pilgrim woman was appeased, and being drawn into conversation again, told them a long story again of Father Amphilohe, who was of so holy a life that his hands smelt of incense, and of how some monks of her acquaintance had, on her last pilgrimage to Kiev, given her the keys of the catacombs, and how, taking with her some dry bread, she had spent 2 days and nights in the catacombs with the saints. "I pray a bit in one, chant a hymn, and go into another. I fall asleep, again I go and kiss the holy relics, and such peace, ma'am, such blessedness, that one has no wish to come out into God's world again." Pierre listened to her attentively and seriously. Prince Andrei went out of the room, and leaving God's folk to finish their tea, Princess Marya followed him with Pierre to the drawing-room. "You are very kind," she said to him. "Ah, I really didn't mean to hurt her feelings. I so well understand those feelings and prize them so highly." Princess Marya looked mutely at him, and smiled affectionately. "I have known you for a long time, you see, and I love you like a brother," she said. "How do you think Andrei is looking?" she asked hurriedly, not letting him have time to say anything in reply to her affectionate words. He makes me very uneasy. His health was better in the winter, but last spring the wound reopened, and the doctor says he ought to go away for proper treatment. And I feel afraid for him morally. He has not a character like us women, to suffer and find relief for sorrow in tears. He keeps it all within him. Today he is lively and in good spirits, but that's the effect of your being with him. He is not often like this. If only you could persuade him to go abroad. He needs activity, and this quiet, regular life is bad for him. Others don't notice it, but I see it." Towards 10 o'clock the footman rushed to the steps, hearing the bells of the old prince's carriage approaching. Prince Andrei and Pierre, too, went out onto the steps. "Who's that?" asked the old prince, as he got out of the carriage and saw Pierre. "Ah, very glad. Kiss me," he said, on learning who the young stranger was. The old prince was in a good humor and very cordial to Pierre. Before supper, Prince Andrei, on coming back into his father's study, found the old prince in hot dispute with Pierre. The latter was maintaining that a time would come when there would be no more war. The old prince was making fun of him, but with good humor. "Let off blood from men's veins and fill them up with water, then there'll be no more war. Old woman's nonsense, old women's nonsense," he was saying. But still he slapped Pierre affectionately on the shoulder, and went up to the table where Prince Andrei, evidently not caring to take part in the conversation, was looking through the papers the old prince had brought from the town. The old prince went up to him, and began to talk of business. "The Marshal, Count Rostov, hasn't sent half his contingent. Came to the town and thought fit to invite me to dinner. A pretty dinner I gave him. And here, look at this." "Well, my boy," said the old prince to his son, clapping Pierre on the shoulder, "your friend is a capital fellow. I like him. He warms me up. Other people will talk sense, and one doesn't care to listen, and he talks nonsense, but it does an old man like me good. There, run along," he said. "Maybe I'll come and sit with you at your supper. We'll have another dispute. Make friends with my dunce, Princess Maria," he shouted to Pierre from the door. It was only now on his visit to Bleak Hills that Pierre appreciated fully all the charm of his friendship with Prince Andrei. The charm was not so manifest in his relations with his friend himself, as in his relations with all his family and household. Though he had hardly known them, Pierre felt at once like an old friend, both with the harsh old prince and the gentle, timid Princess Maria. They all liked him. Not only Princess Maria, who had been won by his kindliness with the pilgrims, looked at him with her most radiant expression. Little Prince Nikolai, as the old prince called the year-old baby, smiled at Pierre and went to him. Mikhail Ivanitch and Mademoiselle Bourienne looked at him with smiles when he talked to the old prince. The old prince came in to supper. It was obviously on Pierre's account. He was extremely warm with him both days of his stay at Bleak Hills, and asked him to come and stay with him again. When Pierre had gone, and all the members of the family were met together, they began to criticize him, as people always do after a new guest has left, and, as rarely happens, all said nothing but good of him. Chapter 15. On returning this time from his leave, Rostov for the first time felt and recognized how strong was the tie that bound him to Denisov and all his regiment. When Rostov reached the regiment, he experienced a sensation akin to what he had felt on reaching his home at Moscow. When he caught sight of the first hussar in the unbuttoned uniform of his regiment, when he recognized red-haired Dementiev, and saw the picket ropes of the chestnut horses, when Lavrushka gleefully shouted to his master, "The Count has come," and Denisov, who had been asleep on his bed, ran all disheveled out of the mud hut and embraced him, and the officers gathered around to welcome the newcomer, Rostov felt the same sensation as when his mother had embraced him, and his father and sisters, and the tears of joy that rose in his throat prevented his speaking. The regiment was a home too, and a home as unchangeably dear and precious as the parental home. After reporting himself to his colonel, being assigned to his own squadron, and serving on orderly duty and going for forage, after entering into all the little interests of the regiment, and feeling himself deprived of liberty and nailed down within one narrow, unchangeable framework, Rostov had the same feeling of peace and of moral support, and the same sense of being at home here, and in his proper place, as he had once felt under his father's roof. Here was none of all that confusion of the free world, where he did not know his proper place, and made mistakes in exercising free choice. There was no Sonia, with whom one ought or ought not to have a clear understanding. There was no possibility of going to one place or to another. There were not 24 hours every day which could be used in so many different ways. There were not those innumerable masses of people, of whom no one was nearer or further from one. There were none of those vague and undefined money relations with his father, no memories of his awful loss to Dolohov. Here in the regiment everything was clear and simple. The whole world was divided into two unequal parts, one, our Pavlograd regiment, and the other, all the remainder. And with all that great remainder one had no concern. In the regiment everything was well known. This man was a lieutenant, that one a captain. This was a good fellow, and that one was not. But most of all, everyone was a comrade. The canteen keeper would give him credit. His pay would come every 4 months. There was no need of thought or of choice. One had only to do nothing that was considered low in the Pavlograd regiment, and when occasion came, to do what was clear and distinct, defined and commanded, and all would be well. On becoming subject again to the definite regulations of regimental life, Rostov had a sense of pleasure and relief, such as a weary man feels in lying down to rest. The regimental life was the greater relief to Rostov on this campaign, because after his loss to Dolohov, for which, in spite of his family's efforts to console him, he could not forgive himself, he had resolved not to serve as before, but to atone for his fault by good conduct, and by being a thoroughly good soldier and officer, that is, a good man, a task so difficult in the world, but so possible in the regiment. Rostov had determined to repay his gambling debt to his parents in the course of 5 years. He had been sent 10,000 a year. Now he had made up his mind to take only 2,000, and to leave the remainder to repay the debt to his parents. After continual retreats, advances, and engagements at Pultusk and Prussisch Eylau, our army was concentrated about Bartenstein. They were waiting for the arrival of the Tsar and the beginning of a new campaign. The Pavlograd regiment, belonging to that part of the army which had been in the campaign of 1805, had stayed behind in Russia to make up its full complement of men, and did not arrive in time for the first actions of the campaign. It took no part in the battles of Pultusk and of Prussisch Eylau, and joining the army in the field, in the second half of the campaign, was attached to Platov's detachment. Platov's detachment was acting independently of the main army. Several times the Pavlograd Hussars had taken part in skirmishes with the enemy, had captured prisoners, and on one occasion had even carried off the carriages of Marshal Oudinot. In April, the Pavlograd Hussars had for several weeks been encamped near an utterly ruined, empty German village, and had not stirred from that spot. It was thawing, muddy, and cold. The ice had broken upon the river. The roads had become impassable. For several days there had been neither provender for the horses nor provisions for the men. Seeing that the transport of provisions was impossible, the soldiers dispersed about the abandoned and desert villages to try and find potatoes, but very few were to be found even of these. Everything had been eaten up, and all the inhabitants of the district had fled. Those that remained were worse than beggars, and there was nothing to be taken from them. Indeed, the soldiers, although little given to compassion, often gave their last ration to them.
The Pavlograd regiment had only lost 2 men wounded in action, but had lost almost half its men from hunger and disease. In the hospitals they died so invariably that soldiers sick with fever or the swelling that came from bad food preferred to remain on duty, to drag their feeble limbs in the ranks, rather than to go to the hospitals. As spring came on, the soldiers found a plant growing out of the ground, like asparagus, which for some reason they called Mary's sweet-root, and they wandered about the fields and meadows seeking this Mary's sweet-root, which was very bitter. They dug it up with their swords and ate it, in spite of all prohibition of this noxious root being eaten. In the spring, a new disease broke out among the soldiers, with swelling of the hands, legs, and face, which the doctors attributed to eating this root. But in spite of the prohibition, the soldiers of Denisov's squadron in particular ate a great deal of the Mary's sweet-root, because they had been for a fortnight eking out the last biscuits, giving out only half a pound a man, and the potatoes in the last lot of stores were sprouting and rotten. The horses, too, had for the last fortnight been fed on the thatched roofs of the houses. They were hideously thin, and still covered with their shaggy winter coats, which were coming off in tufts. In spite of their destitute condition, the soldiers and officers went on living exactly as they always did. Just as always, though now with pale and swollen faces and torn uniforms, the hussars were drawn up for calling over, went out to collect forage, cleaned down their horses, and rubbed up their arms, dragged in straw from the thatched roofs in place of fodder, and assembled for dinner round the cauldrons, from which they rose up hungry, making jokes over their vile food and their hunger. Just as ever, in their spare time off duty, the soldiers lighted campfires, and warmed themselves naked before them, smoked, picked out and baked the sprouting rotten potatoes, and told and heard either stories of Potyomkin's and Suvorov's campaigns, or popular legends of cunning Alyoshka, and of the priest's workman Mikolka. The officers lived as usual in 2s and 3s in the roofless, broken-down houses. The senior officers were busily engaged in trying to get hold of straw and potatoes, and the means of sustenance for the soldiers generally, while the younger ones spent their time as they always did, some over cards, money was plentiful, though there was nothing to eat, others over more innocent games, a sort of quoits and skittles. Of the general cause of the campaign little was said, partly because nothing certain was known, partly because there was a vague feeling that the war was not going well. Rostov lived as before with Denisov, and the bond of friendship between them had become still closer since their furlough. Denisov never spoke of any of Rostov's family, but from the tender affection the senior officer showed his junior, Rostov felt that the older hussar's luckless passion for Natasha had something to do with the strengthening of their friendship. There was no doubt that Denisov tried to take care of Rostov, and to expose him as rarely as possible to danger, and after action it was with unmistakable joy that he saw him return safe and sound. On one of his foraging expeditions in a deserted and ruined village to which he had come in search of provisions, Rostov found an old Pole and his daughter with a tiny baby. They were without clothes or food. They had not the strength to go away on foot, and had no means of getting driven away. Rostov brought them to his camp, installed them in his own quarters, and maintained them for several weeks till the old man was better. One of Rostov's comrades, talking of women, began to rally him on the subject, declaring that he was the slyest fellow of the lot, and that he ought to be ashamed not to have introduced his comrades too to the pretty Polish woman he had rescued. Rostov took the jest as an insult, and, firing up, said such unpleasant things to the officer that Denisov had much ado to prevent a duel. When the officer had gone away, and Denisov, who knew nothing himself of Rostov's relations with the Polish woman, began to scold him for his hastiness, Rostov said to him, "Say what you like. She was like a sister to me, and I can't tell you how sick it made me, because—" Well, just because. Denisov slapped him on the shoulder, and fell to walking rapidly up and down the room, not looking at Rostov, which was what he always did at moments of emotional excitement. "What a jolly lot of fools all you Rostovs are," he said, and Rostov saw tears in Denisov's eyes. Chapter 16. In April, the army was excited by the news of the arrival of the Tsar. Rostov did not succeed in being present at the review the Tsar held at Bartenstein. The Pavlograd Hussars were at the advance posts, a long way in front of Bartenstein. They were bivouacking. Denisov and Rostov were living in a mud hut, dug out by the soldiers for them, and roofed with branches and turf. The hut was made after a pattern that had just come into fashion among the soldiers. A trench was dug out, an ell and a half in breadth, 2 ells in depth, and 3 and a half in length. At one end of the trench, steps were scooped out, and these formed the entrance and the approach. The trench itself was the room, and in it the lucky officers, such as the captain, had a plank lying on piles at the further end away from the steps. This was the table. On both sides of the trench the earth had been thrown up, and these mounds made the 2 beds and the sofa. The roof was so constructed that one could stand upright in the middle, and on the beds it was possible to sit, if one moved up close to the table. Denisov, who always fared luxuriously, because the soldiers of his squadron were fond of him, had a board nailed up in the front part of the roof, and in the board a broken but cemented window-pane. When it was very cold, they used to bring red-hot embers from the soldiers' campfires in a bent sheet of iron, and set them near the steps, in the drawing-room, as Denisov called that part of the hut, and this made it so warm that the officers, of whom there were always a number with Denisov and Rostov, used to sit with nothing but their shirts on. In April, Rostov had been on duty. At 8 o'clock in the morning, on coming home after a sleepless night, he sent for hot embers, changed his rain-soaked underclothes, said his prayers, drank some tea, warmed himself, put things tidy in his corner and on the table, and with a wind-beaten, heated face, and with only his shirt on, lay down on his back, folding his hands behind his head. He was engaged in agreeable meditations, reflecting that he would be sure to be promoted for the last reconnoitering expedition, and was expecting Denisov to come in. He wanted to talk to him. Behind the hut he heard the resounding roar of Denisov, unmistakably irritated. Rostov moved to the window to see to whom he was speaking, and saw the quartermaster, Topchenko. "I told you not to let them stuff themselves with that root. Mary's what-do-you-call-it?" Denisov was roaring. "Why, I saw it myself. Lazarchuk was pulling it up in the field." "I did give the order, your honor. They won't heed it," answered the quartermaster. Rostov lay down again on his bed, and thought contentedly, "Let him see to things now. He's fussing about while I have done my work, and I am lying here. It's splendid." Through the wall he could hear now someone besides the quartermaster speaking. Lavrushka, Denisov's smart rogue of a valet, was telling him something about some transports, biscuits and oxen he had seen, while on the lookout for provisions. Again he heard Denisov's shout from further away, and the words, "Saddle, 2nd platoon." "Where are they off to?" thought Rostov. 5 minutes later, Denisov came into the hut, clambered with muddy feet on the bed, angrily lighted his pipe, scattered about all his belongings, put on his riding whip and sword, and was going out of the hut. In reply to Rostov's question, where was he going, he answered angrily and vaguely that he had business to see after,